I was running behind, with just enough time to use the restroom, make some tea, leave out some food for Mitty, and call my dad. The battery on my phone was drained, so I plugged in the charger and made a mental note to call him after this shift. I also thought I should text Shayna to make sure she's okay. I hadn't talked to her in a while, which was weird for us. I'd have to do something nice for all three of them when I finished my first rotation and got my 6 days off. I now had plenty of money to really treat those who are important to me. I never knew my mom. She died when I was 2, leaving my dad to raise me. My dad and I are really close because we only had each other for years. He never remarried. Her passing was so shocking that he walled himself off. We don't talk about Mom much, but he always made sure to let me know that we could. He always asked me how I was feeling, like he didn't want me to bottle up all my emotions. I once asked him if I was at risk of dying too, and he needed a few minutes to tell me it was possible, but also that he thought I would be okay if I had a good support network and didn't get hooked on drugs. I didn't have any pictures of her in my apartment, but I did see their wedding photos every time I stopped by the house to hang out with my dad. When I was younger, I tried to picture my wedding day, but it felt about as realistic as my fantasies of becoming an astronaut or a world-famous magician. If I'm being honest, my dreams were never that big. Looks like I ended up as a weird prison guard instead of a Nobel Award winner. Sorry, Dad. Then again, maybe this was all some twisted experiments on me, and the prisoners were actors. I might be contributing to some great psychological research. My throat felt a little raw, so I poured some honey in my tea and stirred it as I walked to my desk. I powered up the work laptop and decided to try the new button straight away. No sense in waiting to see what it did. The screen lit up, showing a countdown timer with a minute to go. I had the previous 6-hour period off, no forced overtime. I don't think I slept, but I'm not really sure. My thoughts aside of work have been scattered. I often imagine myself still at my desk, still watching, still judging. I must have been sleeping at some point, right? It's not like a person can go days without rest. Speaking of time, was I getting close to the end of my first shift rotation? I couldn't tell. I just knew the warden was pleased with my work, and he rewarded me with a bonus and a promotion. I don't know what I would do with 6 days off from this fascinating, frustrating job. The shift started. My view was the cafeteria. I tested the new computer, and I found that gestures on the screen still allowed me to pan, tilt, and zoom. The door on the left opened, and a group of women walked in and queued up for their meals. This was a smaller group than I was used to seeing, only 5 prisoners. I picked one at random, the one in the middle. She didn't do anything wrong, but I was past the point of justifying my choices. I pressed the new button. The button barely moved, and nothing happened in the prison. I tried again, no dice. It was like something in the computer was physically blocking me from fully pressing it. I decided not to press the other button, the punishment one. Maybe I was getting soft in my old age, but I liked her curly hair, so I just watched as she and the other women got their food and sat at the same table. I remembered someone suggested I try to zoom in on the food to see what they were eating, so I did. It didn't look particularly gross. It looked like chicken curry with a side of rice pudding. When I zoomed out to see the whole cafeteria, I noticed a new prisoner had entered and was picking up a tray. Her face was pixelated. I couldn't tell if this was the same one I had seen before with the pixelated face. It could be, but it was hard to tell when they all wore the same uniform, and I saw so many prisoners per shift. She joined the others at the table and started eating. As each prisoner finished eating, they turned in their trays at the other end of the kitchen wall and walked towards the door. I held my finger over the punishment button, waiting for an excuse to prove my worth to the warden, but nothing really stood out to me as a violation. Pixie was the last to leave the room. She slid out as the door was closing, deftly gliding through without touching the door frame. A few minutes later, a trustee entered to clean the cafeteria. It was a young kid I had seen before, someone who looked like he might still be a teenager. I decided to call him Jeremy, after this pimple-faced cartoon character with the squeaky voice. His cleaning skills hadn't improved. Jeremy did everything ass backwards, first mopping the floor, then tracking over the wet floor to wipe down the tables and chairs. When he finished, he started pulling the mop and bucket towards the door. I remember the warden was counting on me to light the path to atonement, so I pressed the button. The screen went black, as it does. I heard a noise from the kitchen and looked over to see Mitty was eating. I tried calling him over, but he ignored me. I thought briefly about pushing his button, but I snapped myself out of it. What did that even mean? I love that little asshole. Why would I want to punish him? Maybe I really was getting lost in the power of this job. As I was considering my impulses, the screen lit back up. Jeremy was gone. Along with the mop and bucket, something was left behind on the floor. A small bit of debris I couldn't quite make out. I used the camera controls to zoom in and try to make out what it was. I wasn't quite sure what I was looking at. It was some sort of litter leading towards the tray return, and my mind flashed to a story about lost children leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. When I was 12 years old, I read it aloud to my dad while he was home recovering from a work injury. A hydraulic press had severed a chunk of his left hand, cutting off his pinky and ring finger, along with a good bit of his palm. He got over the pain of the injury pretty quickly, but I don't think he ever got over losing his wedding ring. While he recovered, I would read to him when I got home from school. When I ran out of books I wanted to read, I had to go lower on the shelf to find other stories. My dad joked that those were the deep tracks, the hidden gems that don't get as much airtime. He was still home when I read through all those books, and he was still home when the cable got cut off and we had to find the bunny ears for broadcast television. Our budget was tight for a few months, so one of those luxuries my dad gave up was his Schlitz. When he eventually got a new job, the cable came back, but the beer never did. I blinked out of my stroll down memory lane and looked again at the floor of the cafeteria. At first, the litter looked like disjointed bones from a couple of severed fingers, but that wasn't right. The trail of breadcrumbs leading to the tray return was made of teeth, some of them broken as if pliers had snapped them in mid-extraction. I shuddered, wondering if these were really Jeremy's or some prop for the experiment. Would a prop guy think to break fake teeth before dropping them on the floor? The lights went dim and nothing happened for a few hours. I used the time to consider how this cruelty, real or not, was supposed to guide prisoners to atonement. Was that really my mission? Someone whose teeth may have been pulled out or was possibly forced to eat another prisoner's vomit or maybe was beaten with a claw hammer. How did that person grow to become a model prisoner or even become reformed enough for their eventual release? It dawned on me that I was crushing them with every use of the button like a hydraulic press. A countdown timer appeared on the screen, the sign that I was about to start an overtime shift. I stood up and stretched, and I nearly jumped when I noticed Mitty was crouched on the windowsill behind me in a pre-pounce mode. He looked like he was ready to jump toward me and slap me a few times before darting away. Just one of the charming ways he liked to show his affection. Maybe it meant he was no longer mad at me. I made a mental note to play with him during my shift. Maybe I'd have time to grab the laser pointer for a game of chasey mousey. I put the kettle on and reached for a mug, but I couldn't find any in the cupboard. I checked the sink and quickly rinsed one, drying it as I shuffled to the restroom. I smirked as I thought I was on a schedule just like those prisoners. I've got time to get the bare minimum done to make it through the next shift. I got to my desk with less than a minute to spare, my throat still raw. I wondered if I was getting sick, and it occurred to me that I forgot to check on my dad. I was about to grab my phone when the timer hit 0, and my shift was supposed to start. I hesitated for a second or two before pressing the power button. "Sorry, Dad," I thought. "I'll make it up to you." Cafeteria, lights on, empty. The cage on the window had been pulled open, but the window itself appeared to still be closed. I watched as the door on the left opened, and a single prisoner walked in. The door closed behind him. I recognized the sad second-insurance salesman type I called Eugene. He took one look at the window and spun around, only to see that the door was already closed. He glanced at the camera, then turned and walked towards the kitchen and stood at the end of the wall where the trays were presented to the prisoners. No tray came out. I didn't do anything. I saw no violation, and I was feeling conflicted about whether to push the button if I saw one. I didn't understand why I kept changing my mind about this job. When I was talking to the warden and looking at the money, it was great. Looking at the implied consequences of my button push for Jeremy made me think it wasn't worth it, even if it was an experiment. Was I raised to be the kind of person who would gleefully crush someone, even if they deserved it? Eugene gave up on getting a tray. He walked over to a table and sat down, his head low. I wonder what he was thinking. Did he feel like he was being set up? How did he end up here himself? I wonder if he had been chosen to be a sacrifice or if he volunteered. Maybe the alternative to chicken curry and rice pudding was worse. I guess it didn't matter because Eugene didn't get his dinner. He got railroaded into a prison cafeteria with an open cage on its window and no officers in sight. He tried to escape before. Maybe the staff was baiting him to try again. Maybe this time the window would open. I was absolutely fascinated with this dilemma. Would he make a run for it? Would he count on me letting him to try? Would he try to communicate with me, even knowing it would be a one-way street? When we were kids, Shayna once stood up for me when a bully was taunting me over my dead mom. She knew she was facing a difficult choice. Run for help and leave me alone with the bully? Or confront him with the knowledge that she was risking her own safety. She stayed, and I loved her from that day forward. The minutes passed into hours. Eugene stayed seated, though he had shifted his position and was looking out the window. I decided to take a chance, hoping I could help him, hoping I could show him some compassion. I panned the camera over to the window and zoomed in so that the reticle was on the cage. I held my breath, and I pressed the button. The screen went black for about 10 seconds. When the view resumed, the cage on the window was shut. Eugene was still seated, his palms pressed flat on the table. His mouth was open, his breathing deep. With wide eyes, he looked over at the camera, at me. Then I panned the camera over to the door on the left, hoping I could open it with the button to let him retreat back into the prison. As I was zooming in on the push bar to the door, my view was obstructed. I zoomed out to see Eugene pulling on the door, trying to keep it shut. He was shaking his head quickly as he looked at me. I zoomed out and panned away from the door. Eugene walked to the middle of the room and faced me. He shook his head, telling me no. Then he pointed at me before raising his left hand, palm up and out, and pressing a finger firmly into the palm of his hand. He then pointed back at himself. It looked like he wanted me to push the button on him. We were finally getting somewhere, and he wanted me to punish him? What the fuck? I panned the camera left, right, center, hoping he could appreciate I was telling him no. No button. Eugene pressed his hands together, a pleading gesture, then pointed at himself. I didn't feel like this was the right thing to do. How could I light the path to his atonement when he was the one deciding to be punished? Our stalemate continued, I don't know for how long. Finally, Eugene looked at me and said one word. I think it was, okay. He turned and walked towards the kitchen wall, and he started to climb into the tray return. I panicked. I had seen what might have been a dead body get pushed into the return, and I had just seen a trail of broken teeth leading to it. Whatever happens on the other side of the tray return, I knew I didn't want Eugene to experience it. I gave him what he wanted. I aimed the camera at him, and I pushed the button. The screen went black. I felt a rush of air as a midnight-hued fur missile flew over my shoulder and splayed over the laptop. When Mitty was younger, I used to let him sleep on the keyboard. I read somewhere that cats like the heat that comes up through the keys. He got so used to it that I ended up buying an older computer just for his use. That was back when I hoped I would marry Shayna and move into a beachside trailer with her. My dreams were never big, but they were more than this. Mitty swatted at me a few times, and I was so thankful he was playing with me that I didn't notice his other paw was squarely on the new button. He crouched to leap away from me, and I heard a faint click as the new button sank into the keyboard. The screen lit back up, and I witnessed the extent of Eugene's punishment. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more or simply like to support my channel, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps out. Until next time.